Hey guys, thanks for joining us. We're going to do a little continuation. The first time we were doing this, we had a little technical difficulty, so we had to kind of cut it short. But basically, just to kind of recap what that was, me and Justin are going to talk about his Christian worldview in specific to free will in the fall into sin and corruption, right? What I'm going to do is an internal critique. So we're not debating. I'm not debating Justin. I'm not trying to show he's wrong or not. Anything that he's saying is not true. In fact, what I am going to do is actually assume the truth of his worldview. And that way, we can both know at the end of the day, at the very end, it's still true. So the only purpose of it is to show any sort of logical inconsistencies within the view. That's what the critique part is all about. So that's what we're hoping to do, is find something that gives you a good challenge to your view. It's just a way of doing a critical thinking game, so to speak. So anyways, so we're talking about God and everything like that, God and the God of the Bible, the Christian God. And I guess my first question, because we have to get definitions out of the way, because I want to adopt your worldview. That means I have to know exactly what it is so I can do the critique. So I guess the first part would be relative to this situation. So what is the nature of God? What is his properties?
Man, you ask these big questions right out of the gate. Okay.
Yep. There's no wrong answer. It's whatever your answer is what I'm taking as truth. You're just you're teaching me.
Okay.
You're teaching me. Yeah.
Okay. I'm actually, I adhere to classical definition of God, which is actually found across traditions and not even just the Christian tradition, but so generally it's, obviously we have the omni attributes: omniscience, omnipresence, and omnipotence. But it goes deeper than that, in that God is considered wholly other. So God is the creator. That's a foundational thing, and a foundational truth. And God is spirit. So what all this amounts to is that, I mean, it actually is kind of difficult, because if you boil it down, the divine nature is mysterious. So we can point to it, and it's called the apophatic way. You kind of shave off what God is not to find what God is.
Okay.
But I guess you could say that God is the originator of all things, the one who holds it all together at all times, and the ultimate mind, and utterly simple. And that's an important point too, because actually a lot of critics of theism don't realize this, that classically speaking, God is supposed to be utterly simple. And so this undermines actually a lot of the critiques that are brought against the existence of God. But that means that you can't empirically. It's not a matter of empirical fact or identification. It's a matter of first principles. Realize that God exists. So
Right.
so anyway, I would just say the invisible, intangible, rock bed reality by which all things exist,
Okay.
and which is the mind.
So with the mind, properties, in other words, all knowing, all loving, all of these things, right?
And I'd also add, within the Christian tradition, of course, we have Trinitarianism. So, that would be classically defined as one being, three persons, and how this works with divine simplicity. I was saying that God is simple, is that it's actually the relationship of God's nature into Himself.
Right. And for this discussion, just to be clear, whether God was a Trinity or not, it would have no bearing on this issue that we're talking about. So that's good to know. But the main point that I wanted to get at was this properties of God, like
Hmm.
his he's all knowing, all loving. He originated everything. He created
Right.
everything, right?
Hmm.
Everything meaning everything. Okay.
Hmm.
And so
I will say
so
sometimes Trinitarianism can help
that
to
gives me an
understand.
idea. Well,
Yeah.
that gives me a good idea of where the
Okay.
critique I can build the critique with. So
Yeah.
um okay, so here we go. God created this all-knowing, all present, all loving God
Hmm.
creates the
Hmm.
heavens and the earth, right?
Right.
Um,
And transcended a
so
time. We discussed this last time a little bit, but
mhm,
he's also transcended a time because time is a creation of God.
okay, okay, cool,
Classically speaking, not every theist will say that, but classically
right?
speaking, that's true.
So God, God needed to create, the angels, the humans on earth, all of these things. So he did that, and he saw it was good and all of that good stuff. But then
Hmm.
we get to the fall. We get to the part where um, Adam disobeys God, right?
Hmm.
Now part of the properties of man at this time, before we get into that, what are the properties of Adam and Eve? What are they all knowing, all loving? Are they
No.
like omni in the, so are they totally innocent? Like, are they like sort of, like a baby, new in the world, innocent,
Mm, yeah, that's a really good question.
sinless, sinless, you might say.
Sinless. Yeah. Yeah.
So they were sinless.
Right.
Okay. They were sinless people. Then God gives them a command. Don't
Right.
partake of the fruit of the knowledge of good and bad, that tree. So these
Hmm.
sinless people decided to disobey God out of their free will. So free will is this thing. Let's define that. What does free will mean to you? I think we touched on it last time,
Hmm.
and you were kind of describing a certain version of determinism. What is that?
Uh,
Compatibilism or
I
something
would.
like that.
I, I used to consider myself a compatibilist. I'm not sure that's the right way to describe what I believe, but uh, talking about free will gets kind of tricky, and so I'll just say this: what I would define, how I would define the scope of free will is that we have an agency under our own. Well, we have our own independent agency that is not controlled by anyone else, including God. And we have the ability to use that will, um, for our own purposes, our own desires or decisions. And
Mhm,
so there's that metaphysical ability to make a decision between options. Now, that's not to say that we're always, you know, we're always totally like free in the ultimate sense. Like you might fall in love with someone and you just can't help yourself. You might, you might be so hungry. Yeah. Oh,
mhm,
like when people will they'll get so enraged at somebody being beaten up,
mhm,
like say a vulnerable woman, and they black out, and the next thing they know, they have the guy pinned to the ground. In a sense, they didn't consciously choose that, but their
right.
will, their whole as a whole being. That's why I was talking about your will actually encompasses your whole being. Chose
Mhm,
that path.
okay. Okay. I just want to get an idea of where we're at with that part of it.
Yeah.
So Adam could freely decide
Hmm.
with or without God's permission. He was he
Right.
was he was enabled, created to make good decisions, bad decisions on his own free willing,
Right.
right?
Right.
So So as a free will agent that was sinless, he made a bad decision. He, of course,
Hmm.
ate of the fruit, and then not only did he end up spiritually and physically dying, all of his descendants were in that predicament too. They inherited sin and death. Is that part of the your belief?
Uh, Essentially, yes. I would say it's a bit nuanced because, um, okay, so I'm still like digging into this. So
Mhm.
I wouldn't say that I have a final
Perfect.
conclusion on this
Perfect. We can
exact topic.
discuss it.
Yeah.
What is it that's you're not sure about? What part?
Well, there's a little bit of fuzziness on what is causal, as far as like our nature, our degenerate nature. Um, there are some who say that we basically have a good nature, but that we choose sin because we um, we don't have the freedom of grace to start out with to not choose it. There are some who say we just, and that's almost identical with just the doctrine of original sin, as I understand it. Like there's the doctrine that we're all guilty of the original sin, or guilty
Mhm.
of sin because of the original sin.
Mhm.
Um, which I'm not. It's something I'm looking at. I'm looking at Catholic doctrine right now, um, and trying to really sift through stuff. So I don't know what I can affirm or disaffirm right now.
Mhm.
But there's some play in there, for. But I do think that yes, because Adam sinned, that means that the rest of humanity generally. Now we don't have to include uh,
But
children before the age of accountability, or say like
well,
Mary, if she was
so sin we're not sure about, but death
yeah.
like physical death for sure, right?
Uh, yes, under the auspices of sin. Yeah, I mean, under the auspices of
Because sin
Adam,
was sin is
corruption.
and let's get this definition. Sin, this is a curse, is it not? Is this a curse? When we talk about God's sin, Adam was cursed with sin. Is this literally what it means, that he was cursed by God?
Uh, to curse by God to sin? No, I wouldn't say that.
No, no, cursed by God for disobeying him,
Oh,
to become a sinner and to die from that sin. He inherited sin.
uh, yes, though I wouldn't see. I don't look at the curses in Genesis 3 as being like imposed curses. I believe they're natural consequences that
Mm.
are entailed by the fact that he did it, and that God's pronouncing just that very fact. Now, again, if
So
my
it wasn't God's will that Adam fall into sin. That wasn't his will. That
no,
was
no,
but he was a free will agent, so he couldn't, his hands were tied. He couldn't make Adam be a robot. He had to give him free will to make the decision, bad or good, whatever the outcome was going to be, which you said God is also all knowing. So he
mhm,
kind of knew this was going to happen. I would
right.
assume God's not stupid. He knew Adam was going to fall into sin and corruption
I think I know where
after
you're
he
going with
created it.
this.
I mean, it's just a question. Well, this is what I'm trying to get out of you. Like, what is your take on that?
Okay, okay. So there, in one sense, uh, you say it's not God's. It was not God's will for Adam to sin because he doesn't will evil.
Okay.
He's not uh, determining that Adam will sin. He's not secretly hoping that Adam will sin or anything like that. Um, however, however, we have to realize also that God infinitely values our free will, as because we are ends in ourselves. So um, it's sort of like a good parent who has a kid who does some awful things, still loving their kid and wanting them to exist and to have a will that can choose between good and evil.
Hmm.
despite the fact that they're doing awful things. So they affirm the agency of their child. They give them their freedom. Particularly, let's say an adult child, just to make it look as neat as possible. Because I mean, there's some fussiness with like an underage child there, but an adult child, they still affirm their child's will and say, "I don't regret bringing this child into existence," and I still desire for them to have their freedom and their agency. However, I don't like what they're doing. So there's one sense in which God doesn't will the sin of Adam, but in another sense, He says, um, "I know this is what Adam chose, and I affirm his use of his agency because it's a free use of his agency, and therefore I'm going to accept the fact that he did this and incorporate it into my plan." And that's where you get the Christian gospel later on, where God receives into himself the sins of man freely. Um, he doesn't say, "I want to condemn you," or like, and there's no hope for you now. He doesn't say, "Well, I kind of secretly wanted you to do it."
Yeah, I understand.
Like
I think I get
that.
the point. So
Yeah.
let me ask you this then. If like you say, God foreknew, he has
Hmm.
this foreknowledge. He knew what was going to happen. So he wasn't surprised when
Right.
for the fall and everything, for all of history, everything that's ever going to happen. It's
Hmm.
not a surprise to God in your view.
Right.
Um, so with God knowing what's going to happen in the future, exactly as it's going to happen, could Adam have chosen otherwise?
Metaphysically, he has the agency to choose otherwise, or you can say had past tense. But I'm kind of speaking from the eternal viewpoint, because anyway. But yeah, he could have chosen otherwise, um, but he
How does
didn't.
that work? But how does that work? How would that work? So that would mean God doesn't know the future.
Wait, why would it mean that?
If God knows Adam's going to eat the fruit, right?
Hmm.
That's what he knew all along that was going to happen, which did happen, right? You're
Yeah.
saying
Okay, I see.
he could have chosen otherwise. And if that means it was a possibility that he could have said, I won't eat the fruit, and then what God would have saw was a delusion.
No. Okay.
So that
Okay.
makes
Yeah.
God limited, right? I mean, logically speaking, that would make sense, right?
Well, no. As I said down at the beginning, when I added at the very end that God created time. So for God, time doesn't exist. I mean, in terms of like any kind of uh, like limitation, um, or in this, like, there's no sense in which God is like going from moment A to moment B to moment C, and that,
So are you saying that makes, what does that take out of the equation here?
well, it's simply this: that when God knowing that Adam is going to sin. Now, this is where the language gets misleading, because when we say God knows that someone is going to do something, we're talking about
All knowing,
the
that's
future.
what all knowing means, right? Like
Right, but
divine
we're talking about
knowledge.
the future in reference to us. To God, it's present. It's present. All times are present
Right,
tense.
right,
So when God
right,
knows that Adam's going to sin, it's because he's there with Adam in
right.
that moment.
So that means Adam, but Adam could have done otherwise anyways, right?
Yeah.
So how does that work is what I'm asking, because the critique here is that if he's looking at the future as though it's the present moment,
Hmm.
that means what he's seeing is actuated. It's the actuated truth of the matter, a
Yeah.
fact
Okay.
embedded in stone. This is what is going to or is happening right in front of me. I'm God. I'm seeing it from a God's eye view. But
Yeah.
what
This
you're
is.
also saying is that Adam could have chosen other than what God is seeing in the present moment. And
Yeah.
that means that God could possibly be seeing a delusion.
Well,
So
no.
That's what I don't understand. How do we make that connection? How can we connect that
Yeah,
together?
this is where it gets really really heady. This is why last week I was trying, and I mean it was really early in discussion for me to do this, but I was trying to get into quantum physics a little bit because it
Hmm.
does kind of help to explain this a little bit. But okay, so at the moment that, or the moment before Adam makes the decision, there is still a potentiality there that has not been made actual for him in his moment. Okay, so he could have done otherwise in that moment. Now, past tense or even present tense, that's not true because I mean it's just a fact he did it. But there's a difference between the um, logically determined fact and the metaphysically determined fact. So just because it's true that future tense, like say I'm gonna I don't know, go to a restaurant after this. Let's say that is a definite fact that God knows. Okay. Um, so even if that's true, it's logically true that I can't that I won't do something else. That doesn't mean it's metaphysically true that I couldn't choose something else. Does that make sense? Because I could go back to
Yeah,
the place I
you're
was staying.
so yeah. So just so you're pretty much like appealing to this kind of superposition of
Right.
possible states that something can be in, kind of like a quantum superposition of possibilities that
That's exactly why
exist.
I was. Yeah.
And so the one that God's observing is the one that's the reality that's
Yeah.
kind of collapsed into that actual fact. But still, see, we still have the problem though, because he's still seeing and observing Schrodinger's cat alive. Okay, that's
Right.
what he's solidified into our reality. But you're still saying that although all of that, Adam can somehow still change that state. There comes a point in time in quantum mechanics where the collapse, you can't switch it. Like, once you observe a particle as a spin up, that's what it is. The other side is spin down because they're entangled, and there's nothing you can do about that. They're entangled. And so whenever you think about a collapse of a waveform, for example, it evolves into a classical, what we call classical mechanics or Newtonian mechanics. And then those things sort of don't apply. And it's kind of what's going on here with you know, the story you're saying. It's like Adam was observed by God being in state A where he ate the apple.
Hmm.
But then you're saying he can now, even though observed, he can still switch it back at his will. That makes
No.
Adam more God than God is. It
No.
seems
No.
like
No. No.
Adam has more power than God.
No. 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 Okay. That's why I made the difference between the logical determination and the metaphysical one. Now I get what you're saying that. Excuse me.
Hmm.
That there's a point at which it's determined. Now, if
Hmm.
we're looking like, say, from the uh, standpoint of the perspective of looking at the whole block universe from beginning and the Big Bang to the heat death of the universe, and you're seeing it all, there are no states of potentiality like fuzzy states where
Hmm.
things could be one
Hmm.
thing or another. But we do observe those. So
Right.
within our reference frame, they do exist. So that's why it's important to talk about reference frames because we have an individual reference frame and then there's the universal reference frame that sees everything that happened.
And
Um,
by the way, as we get farther into this theory, is any of this stuff in the Bible that you're talking about? Is any of this? Do you get any of this stuff from
no, and I don't think it
that
needs to
story?
be. I don't
Okay,
think it
I
needs
just
to be.
wanted I
Okay.
just wanted to I just wanted to put that out there
Okay.
that you're not quoting scripture, you're not teaching gospel right now. You're just sort of hypothesizing and kind of being theoretical about
Hey,
the
I'm on the
topic.
border of being a Catholic, so I don't really have that issue.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
Okay.
So continue, man. Go ahead. So I'm not sure where we left off.
Okay. Yeah. How do I really spearhead
Maybe we
this?
could,
Let's see.
yeah. So, the problem that I'm trying to critique here is the one between free will and God's absolute knowledge,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Those things seem to be a square in a round circle. It's like they're not fitting. They don't seem to logically make sense to me right now. I'm just trying to figure out how can we close the gap on that. What ideas do you have that can make that make sense?
Okay. So you have to understand. Okay, I think actually, really, what's necessitated by this is some kind of idealism, philosophical idealism,
Hmm.
because, or you could say, like I've kind of articulated as like a person-based metaphysics, but
Hmm.
it's sort of a kind of idealism. So for those who don't know, idealism is the idea that reality is just noetic. So that means it's like mental. There's
Hmm.
the universal mind, which you could call God, and then there's minds within that mind, or minds that derive from that mind, or
Hmm.
consciousness. You could term it as consciousness or something like that. So, and you could also have platonic forms like real numbers and things like that in there. Um, so if you have that, then instead of trying to articulate everything as like a reified sort of material like set of stuff,
Hmm.
you have, when you have these reference frames, they actually have ontological weight to them.
Oh, you're talking about Platonic realms.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm a Neoplatonist, so, but
They sound similar to Platonic realms, where
right.
ethics and moral truths and logic is housed in a kind of metaphysical storehouse of
Hmm.
properties of subjective and objective realities out here.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so that's what like. If you don't have, if you're not positing reality as just hard stuff, and you realize that it's actually made of, in a way, you could say it's made of perspectives. It's as funny as that sounds, but when you have different reference frames, they actually have ontological weight. It's not like something that's it's is not placed on top of this hard
Okay,
based reality.
got it. So that we don't go too far just yet, let me just kind of encapsulate what we've done so far. So the free will and then God's absolute knowledge is filled in. That gap is filled partly so far because of different reference frames and different
Hmm.
perspectives. And that's where we're going to fill the gap by coming up with different. But isn't that just throwing in opinions and subjective opinions? I mean, that's what reference frames and perspectives are. They're subjective viewpoints. Are we saying that various subjective viewpoints are going to fix the problem? I'm not sure how. But go right ahead. You weren't even done. So I just wanted to catch up with us so far where we're at, as I understand it, what you're telling me.
Okay.
Does
You
that
call
make
them,
sense? I mean, does that make sense? Did I say that correctly?
I
Or am I
guess. I
really
mean, when you say opinions, I mean, it's kind of an odd word to use to me in that context. But
well, what are perspectives? Let's get a good working definition that you're going with so I know what you mean. What is a perspective?
well, a perspective is like, it's like a viewpoint, um, that you have given a range of observation,
Like a
given a
relative
particular range
position,
of observation. Yeah, relative
kind of
range of observation.
like a relative position somewhere.
Yeah.
Like this is a viewpoint based on a relative position.
Hmm.
Okay. So one
So
person's viewpoint is going to be different from a person who's sitting in a different
yeah, like,
um
yeah,
right
kind of like
relative
if you,
position.
yeah, like for those in the audience. So if you're looking at a house from the corner, if you take that image and you flatten it out, you're seeing, a shape that kind of goes up in the middle and on the bottom. and you're seeing that corner, like in the walls are going off into the distance. Now, if you're looking from the side and you flatten the image out, it's just a square.
Mm-hmm.
So there are different perspectives you can have on the house, and it looks different depending on where you are relative to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to say this too, is that just being the fact of being a creature means you have a relative perspective. You don't have the ultimate,
But
objective.
I'm just trying to understand how multiple relative perspectives are going to make um, Adam able to do otherwise than what God Himself sees in the current moment. Like that seems like so counterintuitive. It sounds like a contradiction almost. It's
Well,
like it's like how can you be seeing something that's really actually happening when there's a possibility that it may not be? I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I'm just not sure how the perspectives come into play. Like, how does other people's perspectives on the same matter make it fit? Are you saying that we add up all their perspectives into some sort of singular universal truth? That doesn't kind of make sense because different perspectives, are gonna obviously kind of differ from one another, because like for example, I guess maybe this is what you're talking about. um a Catholic has a particular perspective about the fall.
mhm.
So does maybe someone in Islam, maybe an atheist does. you know Pagans have perspective about the Bible story too. So all these perspectives that come from different positions, their relative positions of where they are in life, they can all come together, and this is supposed to close the gap
Well,
between that. I just
I
don't
didn't
know
mean
how
that.
that works.
Well, I'm not proposing a sort of pluralistic relativism or something like that. Well,
Okay.
because okay, yeah, I mean that's a good question, but yeah, how do I explain this? Okay, so truth has its own internal coherent framework, and there are such things as illusions, even within a world where, um, an idealistic world, because you can have
Mm,
what's called objective idealism, where there are facts, there are ground, um, grounded facts,
mm-hmm,
and there are um, beliefs, perspectives, and such that are illusions or not true.
mm-hmm,
So it's not directly necessitated that every perspective either is inherently true or can be combined, and they all have the same kind of validity or something like that. So I wanted to at least get that out of the way.
okay.
Um, yeah, like I said, this is heady stuff. um,
That's what's
now
so
I
fun about it.
yeah, true, true. Um, Now you said something that did pique my interest, and I was thinking about it. About the how does this close the gap where Adam can actually have a possibility of doing otherwise, and if we're talking about potential,
God having absolute knowledge. That's the key.
yeah,
Absolute knowledge. That means God knows everything that's going to truly happen. Unless we're saying that God sees both, like maybe he's the only one who can see Schrodinger's cat dead and alive. And so maybe in this story, we're looking at that observation. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
that's a good question, actually.
That would kind of make sense, a little more sense.
Yeah,
I'd kind of help close the gap, I guess.
yeah. Another possibility that I've entertained at certain points is what's called modal realism. Are you familiar with that?
Hmm.
It's that every possibility is actually an actuality, and that you have multiple worlds, and
Yeah.
every possible cause and effect chain actually exists in some parallel dimension.
Yeah.
which has been explored in media a little bit, but I'm not certain about that. It could be the case, and it could be a solution to that.
Hmm.
Now, yeah, I mean, now none of this is going to personally, shake my um, conviction about free will things, because I hold to much of this just through faith, and understanding my own relationship to God and all that, and walking it out. So it's not exactly as simple as, like, I'm using speculative philosophy to determine my own convictions. But yeah, I mean, none of us, like I said, each creature has a relative perspective. None of us have the whole picture. But yeah, these are great questions, and maybe something will come to me as we're talking. But
Well,
I
that's
don't necessarily
cool.
have an answer for everything you're asking.
Hey, you know what? You are doing perfect, man. You're doing like any reasonable
Appreciate it.
person is supposed to do, which
Yeah,
is admit when they maybe don't have all the answers and they need to do more research. And that's what life's about. I'm the same way. I want to know things and understand different perspectives and tie things together and see how they can or can't work, and just go on that journey with people.
yeah.
And that's the whole thing about, um this other channel, the Atheist Uprising, and
Hmm.
they were actually interested to have you on as a guest to
Okay.
speak there too, just kind of talk about your beliefs there as well, in a very, not even in an internal critique or anything,
Mm.
just have you on and have a discussion.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
um yeah, we can do that. Just let me know. That's December the 3rd is when we want to do that,
Yeah.
and then
Okay.
we'll definitely pick up on this conversation again.
Yeah. I will add something. I don't know if you're maybe thinking that we'll wrap this up, but um,
It's up to you.
yeah. Okay. There is something that is really profound that comes out of this within uh, the whole Christian worldview,
Hmm.
and um, it it's sort of like a picture that emerges after you take in the whole set of doctrines and
Right.
really understand them. But what happens is, um, when you understand God is eternal, and everything that has happened has been incorporated into His plan from all eternity. So, um, so again, for clarification for all those out there, what it means for God to be eternal is not merely that He lives forever. It means that every moment, like the end point of the universe, is just as present for God as the beginning is, and it always
Kind
has
of
been.
like the block universe,
Yeah,
B
and
theory. Yeah.
yeah. So a very crude. This is not. I'm not going to say this is what it's like for, from God's perspective, but if you want to have a crude sort of metaphor, it's like as if, um, uh, yeah, I guess the Brian Greene posited the block universe is like a loaf of bread, and you can put it into slices. But you can actually see, like, I'm trying to actually think of another. Oh, okay, like a film strip. Let's use
Yeah.
that metaphor. A
That's the
cartoon film
determ.
strip.
Yep. Hmm.
So you can see the beginning, like with Mickey Mouse, say, the beginning of the cartoon, and then you can go to the end and see Mickey Mouse at the end of the cartoon, and all the
Yes.
frames in between. So it's kind of like that. But again, it's not exactly like that. Now, there's an interactive element with it as well. It's not like just God is just observing each moment of time. He's actually interacting with us. And so you can have funky doctrines, like, I mean, they're actually beautiful doctrines, but they're kind of time paradoxes. So, for instance, the Marian doctrine of um, Immaculate Conception, that's the doctrine that she actually was sinless. Now, what Catholics will say is that she's sinless because of Jesus' redemption on the cross. But Jesus didn't die on the cross until after he was conceived and grew up to be an adult.
Hmm.
She bore him before that, right? So that messes with your idea of time. So it goes backwards in time. Like his death has an effect backwards in time. And so you get funky things like that. So now this plays into the whole discussion we're having because of the fact that for God is already determined, right? But um, I'll have to. I'm gonna make another point after this too. I just have to log that away for right now.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah, it sounds. It's. I'll be honest with you. It definitely will give you a mental workout, working all
yeah.
that stuff out. Trying to remember the block universe, but it's not exactly like a block universe in the sense of interactions. But then, what are interactions?
Mm,
What does that mean? Um,
yeah.
how
So,
does within the block universe part, which is very deterministic, it's a block. It's like a film, like you said. The
hmm
description you gave of it was like a cartoon
hmm
film. So I guess during that part, how does man have free will within that part of reality, that block part? Because that block part that we exist in seems to be deterministic, like a film, like we're just going through the
logically,
motions. Yeah.
logically speaking. But the thing is, if you see it like, and this, I guess, um, you know, this is a way of talking about it that's come to me after thinking about it. It's not even that we need to reify, make like ontologically real this possibility space, like this potentiality, like smeared out potentialities, like in quantum physics and all that. All we need to know is that Adam's decision came from his own being. That's really all it comes down to. So when we when we talk about it was his decision, when we say that it was his decision, it's because his whole being made that decision. It was his own choice. It's not that um, it's not that we need to have a little fuzziness in it. It's that
Hmm.
he chose it. You know, um, so that's important. And I don't know how to ground that at this moment, like just to establish that. I just know that that's just.
It's a good explanation.
I think that's
It's an
what free will, and I
explanation.
believe free will exists. So
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's an explanation that resonates with you somewhere. You're just not sure
yeah,
how to vocalize it or verbalize what you're trying to get across to us, which is fine. I mean, there's a lot of things that people believe for deeper reasons than logic itself. Like, there's things like emotion that comes into play. There's things like just intuitions, even that, that you just know that this is the right thing, this is the truth. you know a lot of
yeah, and
people feel that way. Like, when I was a Jehovah Witness, I felt that way, like 100%. Like I was the most probably active member at the time in my little community, so I understand how it is to just have a conviction that this
well,
is.
yeah, but in this case, we're talking about something very specific, and it's like deep intuition that you know that you know. I know that I know that you're making a decision right now to talk to me
Hmm.
because you're using your free will to do so, and I know that I'm making the decision to talk to you right now, and that's
Hmm.
something that's concurrent with my observations. It's not just a kind of a sort of intuition, a fuzzy intuition or something like that. I just observe it, and that's the thing that makes the most sense of what I'm observing.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, I'm just
yeah,
trying to make I'm just trying to make I'm trying to take that on, but I'm
yeah,
also trying to take your Black Universe thing on.
hmm
So I'm just trying to figure out how to connect now that gap. It seems like we have a little gap there, and I'm just trying to figure out, like you're just saying, it just works. That's just the way I observe it to be. It's like, okay, but still, we evolve to adapt to our environment in a certain kind of way so that we can procreate, not necessarily know the truth about fundamental reality. So
right,
that limitation right there, we have to take on board
Hmm.
as part of this whole internal critique. We are limited minds. We are seeing things through a filter. You know, but um, therefore, it doesn't mean something is a certain way or not. It's just that we have to figure out the best way to fill those gaps. In a
Yeah.
way that you know what I mean.
I'll yeah, I'll add some more food for thought too.
Yeah,
Um, so what I was trying to get at earlier is that when you kind of get the whole picture on this,
yeah,
and there is a sense in which it was God's will for everything to happen as it has happened, even though He used the vessel of free will to do it, and that's where it's kind of like I said, it's kind of mysterious, but
I mean,
but
here's a suggestion I can give to you. Like, if you look at, and it's very similar to what you're saying about block universe, quantum mechanics, all that
hmm
stuff. It's kind of what you're saying, that what the scientists, the theoretical physicists, and these kind of people say is that, yeah, we live in a block universe. That's probably the model most, you
hmm
know, these people go with, is that's the model. Um, but they also understand that quantum mechanics is a thing. Now, quantum mechanics is not deterministic. Quantum
yeah,
mechanics
right,
is random, totally random. And
yeah,
out of the randomness comes an evolution into this classical mechanical world of deterministic block universe type stuff, right? So
that's
yeah,
a great point. It's yeah, it's
we've
even
got two levels at the going on at the same time. But it's like, how
yeah,
do we fill the gap? They can't even fill the gap. They're still trying to fill the gap.
right, yeah, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. It's even a mystery in physics right now. I mean, they do have quantum gravity, just trying to reconcile both fields, but it's not completely there yet. I mean,
Right.
there's at least one aspect of it that's still a mystery. But yeah, it's weird. I mean, reality's kind of weird like that.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
when what really gets me is when Einstein first proposed his theory on time. His hypothesis about time being a physical thing that can bend, it's elastic, it's all of this stuff.
mhm,
It's physical, and the philosophers and even scientists of his day laughed at him
right.
because the philosophers like, well, that's a contradiction in terms, because we all know that time is just it's just a construct. It's not a thing. It's time is a concept that we make for measuring the passage of events and things like that.
Yeah.
And scientists were like, well, it's like you're making this extraordinary claim, but you know we want to see some proof. We want you to back it up. And all these
Mhm.
equations, it doesn't really matter, because equations are just descriptions that you decided to arbitrarily put together to make your thing fit. Until we get empirical evidence, we don't see how this is even going to ever make sense. It's just not even philosophically logical. But as it turns out, we all know time is physical. And
Yeah.
so, it's like our intuitions are always wrong about stuff in our weird reality that you're talking about.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I understand what you mean, that there's things about the fall that could go into this sort of quantum weirdness sort of world.
Mhm.
Is that kind of what you're driving at? Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. To an extent. You know, there's even okay. This is where it gets even weirder. Is that you have the Wheeler-DeWitt equation, which posits that from any given, I think it's something like from any given um, point in the cosmos, you can uh, model it as retroactively causing everything that happened before it and causing everything after
Oh
it.
yeah, the quantum eraser experiment. Yeah, it's where you erase the past information,
Well,
and
no, well,
it's
I
kind of
think it's a
like
little bit different.
backwards,
But
like retro causality. Is that what you're
retrocausality, yeah,
talking?
yes,
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah. So that I mean that, and there you go with the um, sort of a correlation to the Catholic doctrine I was talking about. You know, the weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, so some of this is sort of mysterious, but I think it's kind of inescapable that you do have finite vantage points, that we
Hmm.
do exist as conscious agents that don't have the ultimate omniscient perspective. And if consciousness is irreducible, then we do really exist as those beings. And
Yeah.
yet there is a ultimate perspective. So that's why I say that even though I don't totally understand it, I do believe that that's the case, because I don't see any way around that.
Well, I will say this: from what I understand, most scientists, or many enough scientists, are debating whether space time is really fundamental at
Right.
all. Like they're thinking that space time may be an emergent property.
Yeah.
Um,
That's quantum
some say
gravity.
loop, yes, some say loop quantum gravity. Other people have this other structure um, that's beyond that. That everything emerges from.
Yeah.
And other people like Donald Hoffman would say that, well, if space time is not emergent, if that's the case, we just don't know what it's emerging from, um, then everything in space time isn't fundamental. Like when you talk about consciousness, you
Hmm.
talk about the brain. Well, the brain is made up of atoms and material that's not fundamental. That
Yeah.
matter and energy is not fundamental. So that
Well,
so what is fundamental? So his whole thing is he thinks maybe consciousness is fundamental. But
right.
I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
think he has any reason to say that yet. I think it's still a mystery, but I do find it interesting that he's taken that route and actually doing some really interesting research and
Yeah.
experiments and like evolutionary game theory. He proved a bunch of points and made some predictions that his theory actually
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
predicted. So it
I,
has evidence behind some of it.
I think it'd be fun to just do a purely philosophical sort of discussion about this, because the whole hard problem of consciousness, which for those who don't know, it's that consciousness cannot be reducible to anything else.
Right.
And then also just like a philosophical sort of exploration of why um, it doesn't really make sense to posit a reality that isn't noetic, or like a non-mental reality,
Hmm.
because it doesn't, it's not even a notion that we can hold in our heads by definition, because
Right.
any notion we hold in our heads is noetic. So we wouldn't even know what that is to even posit it to begin with. I mean, that's a really brief
Well,
argument for it.
yeah, that's kind of like the puddle analogy. It's like the water in the hole says, "Wow, this hole was made perfectly for me. Look how it has my little high part here, my low part here. It's perfectly made for me." And then in reality, it's just a result of you know maybe a car skidding off on a muddy road or
Well,
something makes a mud puddle. It's just random, but from the point of view of the puddle, it was made perfectly for him. So it's kind of like, I guess it's similar to what you're saying, I guess.
well, but we already have the understanding, the observation to refute that. But the problem here is that you can use Occam's razor to just
Hmm.
cut off anything else, and say, well, anything material, anything we call material, can be explainable in terms of things that are noetic, like uh, uh, information and qualia and things like that.
So are you an idealist?
Basically, I mean,
Okay.
uh, yeah, I haven't really used that label per se for
Hmm.
a bit, but I guess you basically say I'm an idealist. Yeah.
If you really wanted to apply Occam's razor, you would be a solipsist.
Well, I wouldn't say that, because there it's more explanatory to say that other people are providing input to me that I have no explanation for. Like, people can surprise me or do things that I would have never expected. Have a perspective that doesn't even make sense to me,
Hmm.
and it makes more sense. It's more explanatory to say that they exist separate from me or distinct from me than it does to say that they're all just imaginations.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, because it works. It serves you. It's like if we don't, we're just going to be constantly bumping into hard objects our whole life. If we don't
Yeah,
think that reality is real, I mean, we have to treat it seriously. That this stuff is real and that we don't have control over most of it. If not even ourselves, sometimes we don't
yeah,
have control over our own issues and things of that nature because we're all sort of a property of everything that came before us in our context, like where we live and how we grew up, our culture. Um, these sort of things sort of limit us, and they kind of these things we weren't even conscious of or chose to be in, but yet
yeah,
our decisions are based on the menu that we were served up by the universe.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
A- and I would say I would add to your first point there that that's really all it ever. No, well, let me not say it that way. It's always true that practicality factors in because at the end of the day, we could be speculating all day, but if we're not, engaging, if we're not, like you said, the empirical has a
Hmm.
role to play. And they've actually found when they tried to, and this kind of illustrates that when they tried to create robotics, um, they're not able to make a robot that just simply observes things. It has to engage with its environment in order to learn anything, in order to be able to have some kind of build up to artificial intelligence,
Hmm.
right?
Right. Hmm.
So that engagement, that practical engagement, has to be there in order for us to even make a decision about what something is.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's how the brain develops. So yeah, I'd say that just is true all along the way.
Hmm. Hmm. So that's consistent with the block universe thing. That's
Hmm.
consistent with all that cause and effect sort of causal chain kind of theories. Like, yeah, I can see that, like a one frame leads to the other sort of thing
Yeah,
in the world. So yeah, it's just think about it, try to see how I can understand free will from that absolute knowledge, God's eye view. um
well,
just
I could add something.
Okay.
I've argued this with open theists before,
Hmm.
where they say, if God knows what you're going to do ahead of time, then it's not free. And I said, well, God knows you're freely going to do it ahead of time, so it it is free. That's all you have
Mm,
to do. But the thing
I
is,
mean,
if
free
God,
of what? But I see
right,
what you're
yeah,
saying. I know what you mean.
yeah,
There's a coerce sort of that's the whole thing about definitions and how we can get confuse our definitions. Like if free will you mean without someone from the outside external force in your hand
right,
sort of thing. If there's no one doing that, then yeah, you have free will compared to that because there's no one coercing you. But then in the deeper sense, like the libertarian version of free will is deeper. It says that you are even free of your circumstances. You are free of
of your own
all
nature.
of
Yeah,
your own nature, of everything, of God, of everything that exists. You're free of it. You're totally not influenced, which
right.
doesn't make any sense with what I know about the world.
I'm glad we're going down this route too, because this is very important to the conversation that we're having. So I think there might be more than one articulation of libertarian free will. At least there's some confusion over what it means.
Okay.
What one of my philosophy friends said that libertarian free will is just means the freedom to choose for or against something, like that. But the idea that you're free of your own nature is not really classified under libertarian free will. But I think, the way I've seen it argued, some people do argue it like as if that's what it entails. But yeah, I would say that's absurd. Like that you're free, you're just like free of your own nature. You just it doesn't even make sense. It's almost like indistinct from randomness, like just rolling,
Yeah. Yeah.
God rolling the dice. You
Right.
know,
Right. 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 exactly. So that's what I wanted to figure out. Like when we talk
Yeah,
about the free will of Adam.
yeah.
So
So I
if we
would
think
I
about
need
if we think about his decision, then his decision
yeah,
was the product of, everything that preceded him, the way God, from the time God made him. If we go all the way back to the causal chain, then we would say God is the originator of everything. And I think you said that in your
right, yeah,
description of God. So God is
yeah,
the originator of everything, meaning everything that's done by people.
yeah.
So he
Okay,
originated that. So
yeah.
at
I
least I
puzzled.
would say it how would you answer someone if they would say God has to be at least partly responsible
Mhm.
for the sin that Adam chose to jump into?
Okay, okay. This is great. This is awesome. This is really the meat of the discussion, I think.
Hmm.
Okay, so um, I puzzled over this for a long time. Like, because it does seem like if you're trying to explain everything, like why everything happened, then you have to have some kind of, like causal chain, like you said. Well, the issue here is, um, and part of the problem is that like people made this so theoretical
Hmm.
that that's where it becomes like sort of absurd. And so the way I would say it is this: that the reason that like Adam was able to fall is because he had ignorance um, over the divine nature. In terms of like he could know God like in this external sense, like God has given me so many blessings, He loves me, and He's walking with me, and all that kind of stuff. And so he has evidential reasons for believing that, but he doesn't have an indwelling awareness of God's nature from the inside out, like knowing how God thinks, why He thinks that way. He's not resonating
Okay.
on that level. You know what I
So
mean?
basically, you're saying that Adam had some dark spot that was sort of to blame for why he decided what he decided. There was some part that wasn't there.
And
It's just,
yes, in a
and
sense,
if he would have had that part, he would have had the ability to make a better decision. But because he was missing this
mhm.
particular and very obviously very important part, I wish he would have had it, but he didn't. He had this part missing, and it led to him making that decision that screwed it up for everyone.
It reminds me
So
of a lot of the discussions I've been having with an atheist and that apologetics group that I help
yeah.
admin. Okay, yeah. So let me explain a little bit my view on this. Okay, so yeah, the dark spot is you're using that metaphor for ignorance. Now I was going to clarify for everybody that doesn't mean evil, like just because we're using the metaphor of dark. It just means that
Yeah.
he didn't have the awareness that would have kept him from falling.
So
Now
he was
what?
corruptible.
Yes,
He was corruptible at that point.
right, right. So my explanation for this is that he that there's no way around that. That in order for us to have that kind of internal intimacy and awareness of God's
Hmm.
thoughts and desires and everything, we have to actually choose it. So this is where this also loops back into what we were just talking about with um, that choice, that practical aspect that has to tie in with our understanding and our awareness. He has to choose to be good like God in order to understand the nature of God. Without that, there's just no way. And so if God's going to create anyone at all, they're going to have to start out in a stage where they're ignorant of His own ways and perspective.
So let me get it right. So he was purposely designed to have this ignorant spot, or this dark spot, or whatever, at that particular time. So he was created that way, which seems like he was already kind of corruptible. He was
Yeah,
able to be corrupted, which he was after all. So God created a corruptible person,
Yeah.
So did he really fall into sin and corruption when he, I mean,
Yes.
it seems
Yes.
like he was already that way.
No.
He was created that way. How do we know he wasn't created that way, and that the fruit didn't magically make him, for his decision didn't magically make him sort of
Well,
corrupted,
it's not it's not magic. It's just the fact that uh, when you reinforce, or let's see, how do I put this? When you actualize the thought that possibly God is not trustworthy, then you sort of like enter a reality in which you can't even bring yourself to trust Him. So
hmm
it's not magic. It's just a natural psychological progression when you take that path. And that's where sin comes from. Actually, it comes from lack of trust in God, ultimately.
hmm So one person may ask then, why was Adam punished for making a decision he couldn't help but make?
Uh, well, okay. I don't. I wouldn't say that he couldn't help but make it, but given the contingent situation that he was in, yeah, that's probably you could probably say that it's the only decision he would have ever made. Um,
Yeah,
but
because
you could.
even God knew he was going to make that decision.
Mm-hmm,
God already saw that, as if he was watching the present moment. He saw that happen.
yeah,
So we all know that Adam was going to make that decision. My
yeah.
question is, why then punish him and his offspring to sin and all the things that we see, all the atrocities and unnecessary sufferings that we see in the
Okay.
world? Um, why is that necessary for an all-loving,
2
all-powerful
points.
God? Couldn't he come up with a better plan than that? That's just a critique.
Well, remember, he received the curse unto himself at the end of the story. But there's 2 points about this. First of all, um, like I was saying, I believe these are natural consequences, at least on some level. I'm not saying that there were no angels that went to enforce these, but there's just a sort of natural progression from Adam's sin to all these consequences. The second thing I would say is that, in a way, these are sort of a mercy, because, like, if you have humans who are full of corruption and violence and sin, and you have them living forever,
hmm
like, because one of the curses was that you're going to die, right? If you have them living forever and ever, you're going to have this stratified sort of oppressive hierarchy that never ends, and there's just no way to break things up so that you like, part of the mercy of this is that, as brutal as it is with kingdoms fighting kingdoms and overcoming other kingdoms, it breaks things up where humans don't have the ultimate power.
hmm
And so there's a merciful aspect to this. And if you
hmm
disempower someone who's corrupt, like Adam was at that point, in humans, then you actually enable hope for their redemption.
mm
So we're looking at one slice of the story, like one snapshot of the story, when we say, why would God curse them? That's
Well,
just so mean.
let's look at the curses, at what they are.
Okay.
The one that really jumps out at me is the one about women will have the pangs of distress from being pregnant.
Hmm.
Um, that's a horrible pain. It's led to a lot of premature death. Women have, throughout history, most women died trying to give birth. Um, it seems like a pretty harsh punishment to give to someone who didn't have the skills to make good decisions, and then was purposely put in front of a tree to
Oh,
tempt him and
cringing.
his wife. It
I'm
just seemed,
cringing.
I mean, there's a lot of, these are ongoing, like, questions that critics may have about the story. If we accept the premises that you're giving me, I'm not saying it's not true. We're
Yeah,
granting that
yeah.
it's all
I
true.
understand.
The question is, how are we putting this all together? Because we've got this omni God who knows everything. He's all powerful, all loving. Yet he
Yeah.
punishes people for things they don't know any better but to do. I just
Okay.
don't. I'm just trying to fit that together.
Um. Okay. So first of all, I was cringing at you saying that they didn't have the skills. They did have the skills. It's not a matter of skill. It's a matter of um. I mean,
Ability.
this is no. It's just the
They didn't
ignorance
have the
and
foresight. They didn't have the awareness. There's something they didn't have that gave them an ability to make the right decision. This enabled them, is what you're telling me. You're saying that there's this lack of awareness about either God or about themselves or about the whole situation and context that they were missing, that let them easily go to making the wrong decision. And what I'm curious about is, why would a God who's all loving, all powerful, all knowing, all of this stuff, how would he, have that? Why would that be a reality that he would punish them for that?
well,
Seems
you
kind of
remember
weird.
we
I mean, is that a
remember I
reasonable? Do you understand why they ask you that question? Like,
yeah, I
does
understand why they
that,
asked that question.
do you feel? I mean, do you understand it? I
I
mean, it doesn't
understand.
matter. You don't have to agree. We're going to fix the problem here. We're going to tie it together. That's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to make it make sense together. But I'm just saying, first of all, do you understand the question? Like, why it's a good
Yeah,
question?
I understand because I think it actually comes from conflating two things. It comes from conflating can and will, um, what you can do and what you will do.
Hmm.
So this is why we have to keep a pure understanding of the will. We instead of talking about what you can or cannot do, it's a
Hmm.
matter of your actual um, will to decide. Like you could will to decide something you can't physically do. You
Right.
know, um, like um, yeah, I'm trying to think of a good example of this. You could will to go like run and get on the bus, and then the bus pulls away right before you're able to do it. Um, but you still have the will to do it.
Hmm.
Um, and this, by the same token, it's not a matter of whether they could have or not. Like whether they have, there's a the ability or the possibility or anything like that. The thing is that is what they chose, and it's not that their ignorance made them make the choices they did. It's that it provided an opportunity where it was possible for them to do that. And so when it comes to like why, I mean that's up to each person why they make the choice that they do. And there's a determinative process that goes on in their heads and their hearts. Um, so that's really what it boils down to. Now that can be a mystery because like I mean we can't get inside everybody's heads, but that um, doesn't mean that it was just causally determined. Like you know
Is it
everything that
true
came
that
before it made them do it.
All of Adam's offspring, including us today, have inherited sin and death? Is that part of it?
Yes, and I would say the reason is because of a lack of the grace to transcend and to avoid sin. Because we need grace in order to do that. We need God's Spirit.
So, was there any person in history before the time of Jesus Christ that people were perfect and sinless and
Uh,
not corrupt,
well, I mean,
incorruptible?
oh, incorruptible? No.
Yeah, like they weren't corrupt, they weren't sinful.
Well, those are two different things, though. You see,
Well, I mean
being
both. I mean, I understand they're
oh, okay,
different, but
okay,
I'm
okay.
saying let's add sin on there because we're talking about what Adam the curses were. The curse was sin and death. So
Hmm.
corruptible meaning our body is physically corruptible. It's gonna
Oh, I see.
perish. So I'm
Okay,
talking about sin and death essentially.
yeah.
So there's nobody in
Well,
history that
hypothetically, Adam and Eve would have been before they fell. I mean, I mean, that's how the story goes, right?
Right, but I
So yeah,
mean,
that.
they're the only
But
person
it,
with Jesus Christ, I guess.
well, Mary. I mean, that, if we believe the Catholic doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, which I
Mm,
think I believe now. I know I might shock some people in my audience, but
yeah.
yeah, I mean, but also children who died before. I mean, well, they died, but children who died before the age of accountability never entered into sin.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. So yeah. So basically, I don't think anyone decided anyone had the the free choice to not go into sin and corruption and death and and disobey God. In other words, we were born
Slaves to sin.
guilty. Yeah, guilty. We were
Yeah,
born guilty of sin
that's right.
because
Yeah.
of being, which is
Well,
it's a natural law. But the way that I view, if what you're telling me is correct about the properties of God, God
mhm.
interacts with the universe. He's not only the originator, but also he interacts in the universe. So he allows this nature that he created and originated to have these kind of cause these sort of curses and problems to his children.
Uh-huh.
And you're and what we're saying is that this came about because Adam made a decision and he just didn't have the awareness, to make the right decision. He was lacking that, but
He could. Well, wait. Before we go
and that's what
there
you're,
and conclude that,
yeah,
I'm not saying that he didn't have the. Go ahead.
he had full capacity to make the right decision.
Yeah.
100%, 100%.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, okay, cool. Now
But
we're
yeah. So because
all right.
he had
Cool.
every evidence that God was good and that he wasn't like pulling a fast one on him, right? Like he had no
Mhm.
reason to believe that God was sitting like chuckling behind a tree, like, yeah, I created this paradise for him, and the next second it's going to turn into hell, or something
What
like
kind
that.
of
Or
person what kind of person does that? Like, no, seriously, this is a serious question. Like, what does that tell us about Adam's personality?
oh, well,
He was
well,
rebellious. Well, for
yeah,
one thing.
yeah, because okay, first of all, in the story, it says that Eve was tricked, and then Adam just followed suit, and we're not given a reason why he did.
So he was
Some like,
horny. He was horny.
well, if you read Milton, I guess that's
But Eve was the one who was maybe uh rebellious. She was rebellious and Adam was horny. Gotcha.
Okay, well, we'll just go with that. Okay. But even in Eve's case, you could say it's rebellion because it's not like she was honestly confused, like, oh wow, yeah, like, oh, God's totally corrupt. Like, no,
Yeah.
there was there was envy being provoked in her. So it's like, oh, you could be like just like God, but he's holding it from you. And it's like, oh, I want to be like, but he's not letting me. He's not. He's stifling
So
my ambition.
so Satan kind of influenced her.
Right.
Okay.
If you want a really like fascinating illustration of this,
So
you
she
read
was
Carol.
not so the libertarian free will would say that she was free of any sort of influence. So we're saying though in this situation she was influenced. She didn't just make the decision freely. She
Right.
was actually influenced by Satan to do the decision.
Right. But I would also say I would also always say that influences are not fully deterministic. They just play upon someone's nature, like draw them in a certain direction.
Well,
It's not that they.
there is the butterfly effect, but I'm going along with your, you know,
I get that. Yeah, I get that.
yeah. So
I think this ultimately comes down to whether we believe we're persons or not. Like, are persons real? Because, and really, this might just come down to a doctrine of faith, because I don't know how you go from it's kind of an odd thing to say, I'm not real, I'm not a person. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like, you really have to just accept the fact that you are. And
Well, I mean,
until
the
you
fact
do
that,
that, you can't just build up from arguments and say, well, if we add this together with this, and then finally conclude that yes, I'm a person.
well, you know, um, existing, you wouldn't experience anything if you didn't exist. So, I
Right.
mean, that's not a invalid or unsound grounding. You know, I ground everything. If I had to make some sort of philosophical,
Hmm.
description, it would be like, well, I exist because I experience. Well, I know I exist because I experience existing.
Yeah, that's
If you didn't exist, then you wouldn't experience anything.
right.
So
Yeah.
just off that logic, that's where logic comes from. You can't not exist and exist at the same time.
Right.
So that's where we get the laws of logic,
Yeah.
and
Let me.
we can start
Yeah.
using those.
Let me go on a rabbit trail here for a second, because you actually
Mhm.
tapped into an epistemological journey I went on a while back. I took Descartes, I think because I am, or I exist. Let's see. I think therefore I am, which I don't think
Mhm.
that's exactly the precise translation of what he said, but it's the gist. Okay, so I think therefore I am, and I took that to an experiential level. Like, what is a thought? Um, I don't know, but I'm experiencing thoughts. So
Mhm.
yeah, like you said, I kind of boiled it down to experiences happen. I don't know, like, am I experiencing something? What does it mean for me to experience something? But if you start there, experiences happen, and then you ask that question: are they my experiences?
Well,
Well,
who
if you
in that context, who would we be saying is the me or the my?
right,
Like that's
right,
what
that's
we got
true.
to figure out, because if we're talking about at that level, then we're going to have to start parsing things out so we can start understanding what we're talking about. So you're talking about, okay, there's this process going on supposedly in our brain.
Yeah.
And then from that process, or we actually start thinking. And then the funny thing is we're observing that somebody
Hmm.
is seeing the thoughts, seeing all the things that are
Yeah.
going on locally in your body. There's
Yeah.
there's this observer seeing
Yeah.
all that go down. Like, what, how do we explain that stuff? And
Hmm.
so
Yeah. So I would just say that when you really let this settle in your mind, you'll realize that you have a self-referential framework where you just know, like, you just have an awareness of self that you can even reference whatsoever. And if you have that, then you do exist. You as some in some sense as a consciousness
mhm.
at the very least. So that's why I say also consciousness is irreducible. When you really see that, it becomes an unshakable intuition that it must be true. There's no way around
Well,
that.
and see, this is why I'm so skeptical and such an agnostic about so many things, because we are, there's thinking and then there's experience. It seems like there's
Hmm.
two different things going on. So we can
Yeah.
experience our thoughts, but our thoughts are determined. They're not freely um provoked. Like, you can easily try to stop thinking. If you try to close your eyes and not think, it's
Meditation.
impossible. Always. And it never works. You can never, otherwise, like the Buddha says, you'd be dead.
No, I have gone into
Yep.
states like that in meditation and worship, where I just kind of like, and I'm not even aware I'm there.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
yeah,
And
I mean, but it's like walking backwards into it. You can't just like make yourself do it. It's
and it
kind of
and,
a
and I think
release.
this free will that we're talking about depends on how um detached we are from
Hmm.
thinking and concepts and beliefs and things of this nature. Those things are products of the monkey mind.
Yeah.
That's the chatter mind, always putting stuff together,
Right.
ruminating, trying to understand the pattern, trying to see the future, make plans of the future, survive. That's what the
Yeah.
monkey mind's doing with these stories. We're storytellers,
Hmm.
and it's just that we can take any story, but the value increases in the story when we can tie everything together and close all the gaps and plot holes in the story,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
and that's what I really enjoy doing with people is seeing what they believe and see if we can recognize any sort of plot holes and how we can fill that stuff in.
Yeah.
So, anyways, yeah.
You want me to do that with I was trying to do that before, and then
Hmm.
we got rabbit trailed. But
Yep.
um, so I want to interject this just to pique your curiosity before I explain this.
Uh-huh.
But the early church fathers talked about what's called the Felix Culpa, and that means "oh happy fall." In
Hmm.
other words, it was a happy thing that Adam fell,
Yeah.
because what it ended up happening is that God's mode of redemption is sole means of salvation for us entails that Jesus Christ, God becomes human flesh, or incarnates as human flesh rather. Is Jesus Christ, and through that he actually transforms human nature so that it divinizes the rest of us. You could say it has a universalistic implication. Of course, there's debate about that, about how
Hmm.
universalistic that is. But regardless, it it transforms our nature from the inside out. And so,
Hmm.
because of that, we become exalted to the point of, Jesus says in Revelation, "He who overcomes will sit with me on my throne." That's enthronement language. That's divinization language. And
Hmm.
so, because of the fall, actually, we get a glorious ending. And so, in a way, it plays into God's hands. So
Well,
that's what I was
yeah.
trying to get at before, because yes, it's if you're looking at one snapshot, it's like it seems unfair. Well, God put us in this situation where like, well, we just couldn't help but fall because we were ignorant, and then like He cursed us and everything and all this stuff. But if when you get to the end of the story, it actually all makes sense, and there's actually a
Well, when I
reason.
was when I was a Jehovah's Witness, the teaching was that the whole purpose of the fall and the earth, getting corrupted and falling into the hands of the wicked one, and the
Hmm.
whole drama was that so at the end we could have paradise. You read the end of Revelation,
Right.
you see the happy ending, and it says if it what this is just the path that God took to get us there, and
Yeah.
we have to take a path. You can't just get there
Of course,
for
that
no without a path.
within there's only 144,000 who made it at the end. So
Well, not well.
I guess they
There's a
changed
hundred.
that a little bit, but
No, what it is there's 144,000 anointed.
okay. Yeah.
Um, for them, that means that there's 144,000 that will reign as kings and priests over the earth from heaven.
Right. Okay.
But the great multitude, Revelation talks about a great multitude.
Okay.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
these are the people that are on the earth, living on earth for 1,000 years in paradise. And they're
Yeah.
ruling over this earth. At the end of the 1,000 years, they round Satan up, throw him in hell, in the grave in
Hmm.
hell. So there's no more death, no more anything. And then it's happy ever after that, I guess.
Okay.
Um,
I'm going to give a shout out here to Julian and Norwich. If anyone is reading is watching this and they're like, so many questions, where do I go from here? Read Julian and Norwich, Revelations of Divine Love. She answers everything. I think
mm,
she went into extreme states of meditation and suffering, and she
uh-huh.
received visions that kind of gave a bird's eye view of the whole like story. So I'm just going to recommend that for anyone watching this who's kind of like lost right now or doesn't know where to go from here.
Okay. Yeah.
It's more than I can explain in one little broadcast.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's just an exercise, This is just
Yeah,
to test things out and get us to have fun
yeah,
in the process. But I'm not going to stay on too much longer. It's an hour and a half now. I got
yeah.
to
I,
get
th- I
ready
think
for work tomorrow. Yeah.
I'm gonna get some food. So
Yep. Cool, cool, man. Well, it
yeah,
was
it's been
nice. Thanks
fun.
a lot for jumping in and chatting,
Yeah,
and
sure.
that was pretty fun, man.
Yeah, that
And
was
I'll let you know for next week if you want to join.
okay. Cool. Sounds
All
good.
right. All right, brother.
Talk to you later. All right.
All right, guys.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
Bye.